3 weeks after I buried my wife, I stood in my own machine shed and listened through a plank wall while her baby brother sold my farm over the telephone. He told the man on the other end that I would sign by Thursday, and that once the ink was dry, they could, in his exact words, park the old man wherever it is they park old men. I did not walk around that wall, and I never called out. I stood there with a grease rag in my hand and let him finish, because there was one thing Dwight did not know, and it was the only thing that mattered. The thing those people were paying for was never really the farm. The thing they were paying for could not be sold out of that shed or out of any deed Dwight could get his hands on, and I was the one man in the county who knew exactly where it lived. My name is Gil Stockton. I am 76 now, and for 41 years I was the ditch rider for the Crooked Willow Ditch Company, out on the high plains of northeastern Colorado, where the wind owns everything it touches and the water is worth more than the ground it runs across. Now, before I tell you what I did about Thursday, do an old man a kindness. Put down in the comments the name of the road you grew up on, not the number the county gave it, the name folks actually called it. I read every one of those, usually with my second cup of coffee, and I promise you the names are better than television. Let me back up to the morning we buried Willa, because that is where all of this truly started. It was the second week of April, and the wind had finally laid down for a day, which Willa would have called a courtesy. The church in Coram was full. Not packed the way it gets for a young person, but full the way it gets for a woman who spent 52 years remembering the names of everybody's children. Claire, our daughter, sat on my left with her hand on my sleeve the whole service. She is a nurse over at the county seat, and she has her mother's way of holding still when everything inside her is moving. On my right sat our granddaughter Della, 19 years old, wearing her good boots because Willa always said a person ought to be buried by people in their good boots. And in the third row, in a suit the color of a cataloged photograph, sat Dwight, Willa's baby brother. 68 years old, up from Pueblo, tanned in the middle of April, shaking hands up and down the aisle like a man running for something. I want to be fair to Dwight, and I am going to work at being fair to him for this whole story, because Willa loved him, and because fair is the only thing I have ever been any good at. Dwight was not born crooked. He was born last, into a family that had already used up its luck. Their folks lost their place near La Junta when Willa was 17 and Dwight was 7, and Willa carried him through that the way an older sister does. She braided his shoelaces so he would not trip on the school steps. All his life, whatever Dwight broke, Willa was the one who quietly paid to fix it. And all his life, Dwight believed that somewhere out there was one big deal that was going to make him even with the world. He had been a salesman of trucks, of vitamins, of vacation lots down along the Arkansas. Every one of those ventures ended the same way, with Dwight at our kitchen table and Willa writing a check and me saying nothing, because a man does not get between his wife and her baby brother. So when Dwight stood up at the funeral dinner, in the church basement, with his coffee cup raised, and said he was not going back to Pueblo right away, that he was going to stay a while and, quote, help Gil get squared away, I did not think anything of it. Grief makes you stupid in a very particular way. It does not make you forget things. It makes you tired of knowing them. Here is what I would like you to understand about the life Willa and I built, so you will understand what was actually at stake. Our place is a quarter section, 160 acres, 6 miles out of Coram in Ledbetter County, in the dry country between the South Platte and nothing. My father bought it during the war years, and he liked to say the ground came with 2 crops, wheat and wind, and only one of them was reliable. What made that quarter worth farming was not the dirt, it was the ditch. The Crooked Willow Ditch takes its water out of the river under a decree with a priority date of 1911, which in Colorado is close to aristocracy. If you do not know Western water, here's the whole of it in one sentence, and it is the sentence my father taught me standing on a headgate when I was 9 years old. First in time, first in right. The oldest claim on the river drinks first, and everybody younger waits their turn, and no amount of money changes the order. It is the one line in this country where being early beats being rich. The ditch company is not a government thing. It is a little private company the farmers themselves own, the way their grandfathers set it up. 31 farms, and every farm holds shares of stock, and the shares are the water. Our quarter carries 80 shares, and those 80 shares have been in the Stockton name for over 80 years. For 41 years, I was the man who walked that ditch. The ditch rider is the fellow who opens the head gates in April and closes them in October, who measures every man's water to the inch, who settles it when 2 neighbors both swear the other one is stealing flow at 2 in the morning. In August of a dry year, the ditch rider is the most cussed man in the county, and if he does his job right, he is also the most trusted. I measured honest for 4 decades. There are men who did not speak to me for a whole summer over a half-inch of water who would still hand me the keys to everything they own. And because the company was small and nobody else would do it, I was also the secretary, keeper of the stockbook. Every share in that company, who holds it, who inherited it, who sold it, moves through a green ledger that has lived under my hand since before Della's mother was born. You will want to remember that ledger. It is not a colorful thing, but it is the hinge this whole story turns on. One more thing from those early days, and then I will get back to Dwight. Out in our mudroom, hanging on the same nail it has hung on since Eisenhower, there is a shovel. An irrigating shovel, round point, with a handle cut short the way ditchmen cut them, and the blade worn away to a half-moon from being filed sharp every spring for 60 years. It was my father's. A shovel like that is not for digging. It is for moving water, for cutting a notch in a border an inch at a time, and my father used to say you could tell everything about a man by whether he moved water with a shovel or with a dam of old carpet in a temper. The June before Willa got sick, I took Della out at first light to set water across the East 80, and I handed her that shovel. She's a town kid, raised on her phone like the rest of them, and I expected her to last 20 minutes. She lasted all morning. She learned to read the water the way you have to, by where it slows and goes quiet, and when we walked back up for breakfast, she was sunburned and muddy to the knee, and she said, "Grandpa, it is like the whole field is breathing." Willa was standing at the stove when Della said that, and my wife looked at me over that girl's head with a look I will not try to put into words. That was the morning Willa decided and told me plain that night that the place would go to Della someday. Claire had her nursing and her town life and wanted it so. Della was the one the water had chosen. Remember the shovel too. It comes back at the end of this story, and when it comes back, it will mean more than it does right now. That first month after the funeral, Dwight made himself useful, and I will not pretend otherwise. He mowed. He ran to town. He answered the phone when I could not stand to, and he learned to say, "The family thanks you," in a voice like a radio preacher. But somewhere in those weeks, the help started to change shape. He began opening the mail. He began saying, We ought to think about the propane contract. We ought to look at what this place is really worth." He walked the quarter with his phone out, taking pictures, and when I asked him what for, he said, "Insurance, Gil, you cannot be too careful," and kept walking. And then one evening in May, he came in from town with a folder. Glossy, heavy paper, the kind of folder that costs more than the ideas inside it. He set it on Willa's kitchen table, square in front of my chair, the way you would set down a gift. On the cover, in gold letters, it said, "Legacy Shield," and under that, in letters that were somehow both smaller and louder, it said, "Protect your farm from the nursing home before it is too late." Dwight sat down across from me, folded his hands like a deacon, and said, "Gil, I promised Willa I would look after you. It is time we talked about the future." I did not know it yet, but the future he had in mind had a date on it, and money behind it, and my name nowhere in it at all. The pitch, when it came, was smooth as creek stone, and I want to lay it out for you in some detail, not because Dwight invented it, but because he did not. What he said to me at that table gets said, nearly word for word, at kitchen tables all over this country, to people my age, in the exact season of their lives when they are least able to hear it clearly. If you are past 65, or if you love somebody who is, listen close to this part. Dwight opened the folder and walked me through it with the salesman's voice, the warm one, the one that sounds like it is doing you a favor. He said, "Gil, you are 76. God forbid, but if you fall, if you have a stroke, if you end up needing the nursing home, the state will take this farm to pay for it. Every acre. Willa's whole legacy, gone to a billing office." He let that sit, and then he slid out a paper with a diagram on it, boxes and arrows, and he said, "But there is a fix. We put the farm into a company, a family company. Legacy Shield sets it up. It is all legal. Thousands of families do it. The farm goes into the company protects it, and you go right on living here like always. Nothing changes, except now you are safe." And then he said the sentence that he had clearly practiced in the truck, because it came out rounder than the rest. He said, "Willa would want the farm protected, and she would want family looking after it. I will carry the paperwork. You have carried enough. I am going to be honest with you, because this story is worthless if I am not." It sounded good. I was 2 months into the kind of tired that sleep does not touch. The mail was adrift I could not shovel. Every room of that house had Willa in it, and did not have Willa in it, both at once, and here was somebody saying, "Hand me the weight." There was a full minute at that table when my hand wanted the pen. Anybody who tells you they could never be fooled in that season has never buried the person who did half their thinking. But 2 things stopped me, and neither one of them was brains. The first was habit. 41 years of measuring water teaches you to read a document to the bottom before you agree to what the top of it says, because every headgate war I ever settled started with a man who had read half of something. So I turned the pages, and down in the fine print of that beautiful folder, the family company had a manager named in it already. And the manager was not me, and it was not Claire, and it was not Della. It was Dwight. Manager, with authority to lease, borrow against, and sell. I read that line twice and said nothing, because saying nothing is a skill, and I had 4 decades of practice. The second thing was smaller, and it is the detail that still snags me at 3 in the morning. While I was reading, Dwight answered a question I had not asked yet. I had my thumb on the page where it named him manager, and before I said a word, he said, "That part is just for convenience. Everybody does it that way." A man who answers the question you did not ask has been rehearsing. Willie used to say that about him when he was 9 years old and the cookies were already missing. So I did the only wise thing I did that whole spring. I stalled. I told him my eyes were shot for the night, that the print was small and my head was full, and that a thing this size deserved to be done right, maybe after the ditch company audit, maybe next month. Dwight smiled with his mouth and said, "Of course, no rush at all." And then, inside a week, the no rush turned into a calendar. He mentioned Thursday. Then he confirmed Thursday. That a woman from a title office over in the county seat called the house to confirm Thursday, and a notary, and I stood in my own kitchen holding the phone, wondering how a man with no rush had gotten 3 strangers to agree on a date. Which brings us back to the machine shed, and the afternoon I already told you about, and now you know enough to hear it the way I heard it. I had walked out to the shed to change the oil in the swather, mostly because machinery does not offer condolences. Dwight's truck was gone from the yard, or I thought it was. It was parked around the north side, out of sight of the house, which is its own kind of information. I was 2 steps in the small door when I heard his voice through the plank wall, pacing the way he does, boot heels on concrete. He said, "Kevin, relax. The old man signs Thursday. It goes into the company Thursday morning, and the company signs your option that afternoon. 1 trip to town." A pause, while the other man talked. Then Dwight laughed, and the laugh had no funeral in it at all, and he said, "What is he going to do? He is half checked out since the funeral. He signs whatever keeps the peace. After Thursday, it does not matter what he figures out. You can park the old man wherever they park old men." Another pause. And then Dwight said the thing that told me he did not understand what he was selling, and that the man named Kevin maybe did. He said, "And yes, before you ask again, the water comes with the farm. Water always comes with the farm. Stop asking lawyer questions. You are buying dirt. The wet part is included." I stayed put in the dark half of my own shed, holding a grease rag, listening to my wife's baby brother price her family's whole century out like a yard sale, and I want to tell you what I felt, because it was not what I expected to feel. I did not feel rage. Rage came later, in its turn, and I will show it to you when we get there. What I felt first was cold and very awake, the way you feel when you step into the river in April. Because Dwight had just made 2 mistakes in one breath, and I was maybe the only man in Ledbetter County positioned to see both of them. His first mistake was Thursday. You cannot close a gate that is already closed, and I had no intention of signing anything, so his whole train had no track under it past Thursday morning. His second mistake was that last sentence. The wet part is included. Hold on to that sentence. Everything that happens for the rest of this story happens because that sentence is wrong, and Dwight did not know it was wrong, and the people paying him were about to bet a great deal of money on it. I did not confront him. I want to be plain about why, because this is the part of these stories where somebody always writes to me and says, "I would have kicked the door open and had it out right there." I understand the feeling, but I had settled 40 years of water fights, and here is what they taught me. The man who blows up at the head gate feels better for one evening and loses the summer. If I braced Dwight in that shed, he would apologize and cry a little. He was always a gifted crier, and then he would go to ground, and I would never learn who Kevin was or what they wanted or how far the rot went. A ditch rider does not stop a leak by yelling at the water. He walks the bank quietly until he finds where it is coming through. So I walked back out into the daylight, and I made my face into the face he was counting on, the half-checked-out old man who signs whatever keeps the peace. At supper, I asked him to pass the salt and told him the swather was running rough. You may think that would be hard, sitting across from him, chewing, knowing. It was the opposite of hard. It was the first solid ground I had stood on since April. Grief is fog, purpose is gravel. I slept that night like a man with a job, because that is what I was again. The next morning, I told Dwight I was driving in to have coffee with a retired elevator man, which is a thing I actually do, and he had no reason to doubt. Instead, I drove to the county seat, to the clerk and recorder's office, where anybody, and I mean anybody, you included, can walk in off the street and look at the public record of every deed, option, and lien in the county. It is one of the most honest rooms in America, and hardly anyone under 70 knows it exists. I asked the girl at the counter, whose grandmother I had measured water for, to pull anything recorded against our quarter, and anything with Dwight's name on it. She went away. She came back with a look on her face. I recognized, because it is the look I used to wear when the measurement came out wrong and I had to tell a man so. There was a memorandum of option on file, recorded. An outfit out of Denver called Stillmark Land Partners held an option to purchase our quarter section, and a seller's signature line said, Dwight, as authorized representative of the Stockton family farm, authorized representative of a farm he did not own a fenced staple of. And then I read the date. The option was signed, and the room went very quiet, the way the shed had gone quiet. It was signed the 11th of March. Will had died the 9th of April. Ma! My wife was alive when her baby brother signed that paper. She was in the front bedroom, on oxygen, doing her crossword puzzles in ink because she said pencil was for cowards, and her brother was in a title office 2 counties over, selling her family's ground out from under her dying bed. He had not come up for the funeral at all. He had come up for the closing, and the funeral was simply on the way. I stood in that courthouse hallway with a copy of that option in my hand, and that is when the rage arrived, right on schedule, and I let it come. I am not going to pretend I am a saint in a seed cap. I am a man, and for about 10 minutes in that hallway, I was not a calm one. But here is what 41 years on a ditch bank does for you. It teaches you that fury is runoff. It is loud, it is muddy, and it is gone by June, and nothing green ever grew on it. What grows a crop is water with a priority behind it, moving slow, in its right order, exactly where it is aimed. By the time I reached my truck, I knew exactly where mine was aimed. Because there was one question that mattered now, and the courthouse could not answer it, and neither could Dwight, and answering it is where this story truly turns. Why would a Denver land outfit want a dryland quarter, 6 miles from pavement, bad enough to sign paper on it before the owner's widow was even gone? I had a suspicion. And if my suspicion was right, then Dwight was not the predator in this story at all. He was the bait fish, and the thing swimming under him had no idea that the water it was hunting in belonged to me. Finding out about the option changed the shape of my days, though nobody looking at me would have seen it. On the surface, I was the same slow widower, feeding the dog, waving at the mail carrier, telling Dwight we would get to the paperwork when my head cleared. Underneath, I was working, and the first job was to find out who Stillmark Land Partners was and what they actually wanted. The answer to the first half was easy enough. Della found their filings on her phone in about the time it takes to pour coffee. And I will say this, for the younger generation, they can follow a paper trail through a screen the way I can follow seepage through a pasture. Stillmark was a land assembly outfit. That is a company that quietly buys up ground in a chosen spot for a bigger client who does not want its name on the early paperwork. And for 8 months, Stillmark had been optioning ground all along our stretch of the valley. The Herbst place, the 2 quarters east of the cemetery, old ground, dry corners, nothing anybody would call prime. Unless you knew what every one of those parcels had in common, and I did because I had walked it my whole life. Every single one of them sat under the crooked willow ditch. The answer to the second half walked right up to me, the way answers sometimes do if you stand still and look harmless, which happens to be my best event. There was a young landman who had been working the county for Stillmark, a polite kid named Tyler with a clipboard and the kind of haircut that costs money. He had stopped by our place twice back in the winter, and Dwight had waved him off, which I now understood was Dwight protecting his own deal, not the family. So when Tyler's little crossover pulled up at the co-op while I was loading mineral tubs, I made myself easy to talk to. I asked him how the land business was treating him. I let him buy me a bad cup of coffee. I played the old-timer who remembers when that quarter over there went for $40 an acre, which requires no acting because I do. And Tyler, who was lonesome for anybody who would talk to him without slamming a door, told me more than his boss would have liked. He was not supposed to say who the end client was, and to his credit, he never did say the name. But he said there was a big user coming. That was his phrase, a big user, the kind that runs day and night. He said the site work would go where the cooling water was cheapest to secure. And then he said, half proud, half complaining, that his whole bonus depended on what he called the senior package, because, and I'm quoting this boy exactly, "The dirt is nothing out here, Mr. Stockton. The whole deal is the priority date." The whole deal is the priority date. I drank my bad coffee and nodded like a man who did not quite follow. But inside, the last gate swung open. A data operation or a plant of some kind, it did not matter which, wanted to come to our valley, and what it needed was not our dirt. It needed old water. Water with a claim so senior it still drinks in a drought year when the junior rights up and down the river are cut off. 1911 water? There are only a handful of decrees on our stretch that old, and the biggest one belongs to a little farmer-owned company with a green stock ledger. They were not buying farms, they were buying shares, and the farms were just the boxes the shares came in, and the 80 shares under our quarter were the largest single block in the company. Now, before I did one more clever thing, I did the unclever thing that I want every listener my age to hear about, because this is the part that is actually worth your hour tonight. I made an appointment, and I went and sat in front of a lawyer. A real one. Her name was Carol Reese. She had an office above the bank in a county seat, and the sign said Elder Law, which I had always vaguely thought meant wills for old men. It does not. It means everything that happens to a person in exactly the season I was in. I showed her the Legacy Shield folder, and I watched 20 years of patience and about a quart of anger move across her face at the same time. She told me things I am going to repeat here in a general way, and you check all of it with your own lawyer in your own state, because that is the entire point I am making. She told me that folder was a pattern she sees every month, that there are outfits that watch the obituaries, the way Frost watches for a clear night, and aim that exact pitch, protect the farm from the nursing home, at widows and widowers inside the first year, because grief signs faster than judgment. She told me that moving your land can have consequences the glossy folder never mentions, with the government, with your taxes, with your own roof over your own head, and that the manager line I had caught in the fine print was the whole ball game. Whoever manages the company controls the land. She said, "Mr. Stockton, you did not almost protect your farm. You almost handed it to your brother-in-law in a gift box." And then she asked the question that lawyers earn their money asking. She said, "Before we talk about what they want, what exactly do you own and how exactly do you own it?" Folks, we are right at the door now, the door this whole story swings on. If you have ever been the one who quietly kept the books while somebody louder called you simple, then this next part belongs to you. And if you want more of these quiet evenings with a man who believes the patient ones win in the end, go ahead and press that subscribe button now, because you're about to find out why I could afford to be patient. I went home, and I opened the safe box Willa and I kept in the floor of the closet, and I took out two things. The first was a stock certificate and then 7 more like it. 80 shares of the Crooked Willow Ditch Company, and on the face of every certificate, in my own careful secretary's hand, because I had issued these very certificates to ourselves when the company reorganized its books years back, it said, Gilbert Stockton and Willa Stockton, joint tenants with right of survivorship. Now that is a dry mouthful of words, so let me tell you what it means the way Carol Reese told me. And again, the particulars belong in a lawyer's office, not a video. A ditch company share is not the land. It is stock. Like stock in any little company, a piece of paper that can be owned separately from the ground it waters. And joint tenancy with right of survivorship means that when one owner dies, their half does not go through the will, does not go through the courts, does not pass go. It flows instantly and automatically to the survivor. The moment Willa closed her eyes on the 9th of April, every one of those 80 shares became mine alone. Not the estates, not the families, not anything any deed of the farm could touch or carry along with it. Mine by survivorship, the oldest quiet trick in the book, and we had set it up that way 20 years ago on the advice of a lawyer long dead, for no better reason than that it was tidy. Dwight was maneuvering to get a farm into a box he controlled, so he could sell the box with the wet part included. But the wet part was not included. The wet part had never been included. Under Colorado law, and still Mark's own lawyers would know this even if Dwight never would, water like ours moves with the shares, and the shares were sitting in a floor safe under the boots of the man he was planning to park somewhere. And the second thing I took out of that safe box was the green ledger, because here is the part that still makes me shake my head at the size of God's sense of humor. I was not just the largest shareholder in that little company, I was its secretary. Had been since Nixon. Every transfer of every share in the Crooked Willow Ditch Company is not legal until it is recorded in the stock book, and the stock book lived in my house, and the bylaws my father's generation wrote say one thing more. They say that if a share is to be sold to anyone outside the company's own farmers, the company itself gets the first right to buy it back. The old men wrote that rule in 1946 because they had seen a speculator try to pick off a widow's shares in the dust years, and they swore it would never happen twice. So now you know what I knew. Sitting on the floor of that closet with Willa's winter coats brushing the top of my head, the people circling my family were not wrong about the treasure. They were wrong about the map. Every road they thought led through Dwight, and through Thursday, and through a grieving old man's signature, actually led through a green book and a first refusal rule and a survivorship clause, all 3 of which had my name on them. I sat there a long time, and I will tell you the truth, part of what I felt was Willa in the room because the survivorship papers had been her errand all those years ago. She drove to town in the rain to sign them and came home and said, "There, now whichever of us goes first, the water knows where to stay." We laughed about it. It was a Tuesday. You do not know, when you are signing the tidy little papers on the boring Tuesdays, that you are building the wall your family will someday stand behind. That is the real sermon in this story, and I will only preach it once. The boring paperwork you do early with a good lawyer on an ordinary day is love with a date stamp on it. First in time, first in right. It is true on the river, and it is true in a family. But knowing I held the water was not the end of anything. It was the beginning, because now I had a choice to make, and it was not the choice you think. I could have ended Dwight's deal that same afternoon with one phone call to Stillmark's office. And I very nearly did. What stopped me was a second phone call, one that came to me 2 evenings later from the president of our ditch company, old Bert Coles. His voice was strange. He said, "Gil, I do not quite know how to say this, so I will just say it. What is this I am hearing about you, and are you all right in your mind? Because there is a letter going around to the shareholders, and your name is in it, and Gil, the letter is from your own family." Bert read me the letter over the phone, and then I drove to his place and read it with my own eyes, because there are things a man needs to hold while he gets angry at them. It was addressed to the shareholders of the Crooked Willow Ditch Company, all 30 farms. It was signed by Dwight as, and I quote, acting spokesman for the Stockton family. It was 2 pages, and it was clever, and I have puzzled a good while over why it was clever, because Dwight did not write it alone. It never named me with disrespect. It wore concern like a Sunday suit. It said the family had noticed with heavy hearts that Gil had been struggling since Willa passed. It mentioned, more in sorrow than in anger, a missed payment at the propane office, and a gate left open on the East 80, and a morning I had, quote, seemed confused about dates. It said that with a historic opportunity coming to the valley, the company deserved leadership with its full faculties, and that at the annual meeting in December, the shareholders would be asked to do the kind thing, the merciful thing, and vote to relieve Gil Stockton of his duties as secretary and to appoint a transition committee to review the stockbook for irregularities. And it closed by asking each shareholder to sign the enclosed proxy so that their vote could be cast for them by the family if they could not attend. I want to stop on this a minute, because if you take one warning out of tonight besides the folder, take this one. When a schemer cannot get your signature, the next thing he goes after is your reputation for knowing your own mind. It is the oldest move on the board, and it works because it cannot be argued with. Stand up and shout that you are not confused, and you have handed them their evidence. Every flash of temper becomes a symptom. Every quiet day becomes a decline. The propane payment, by the way, was missed because Dwight had been collecting the mail. The gate on the East 80 was left open by Dwight. The confusion about dates was an afternoon I told him Thursday would not work for the signing. He had been assembling his little museum of my failures for weeks, one planted exhibit at a time. And here is the part that cut. Some of it was working, not on my old friends, not on Bert. But the county seat is a small pond, and Vonda, Dwight's wife, had been doing quiet work of her own at the beauty shop and the church coffee hour, dropping little sighs about poor Gil, and by August I could feel it when I walked into the co-op. A half-second of extra kindness in how men spoke to me. The particular gentleness people show you when they have been told you are failing. If you have felt it, you know. It is a kindness that takes something from you. The worst evening of that whole summer was not about the farm at all. It was Della, standing in my kitchen with her car keys still in her hand, not sitting down, and she would not look at me. And finally she said, "Grandpa, Uncle Dwight told month over month you have been giving away shares in the ditch company to strangers, and that you almost signed the farm over to some company in Denver, and that he stopped it. He says that is why there has to be a committee." And she stood there waiting, 19 years old, wanting me to make it not true. He had taken his own crime and hung it on my neck. Taken the very deal he built and recast himself as the son-in-law who heroically caught it. That is not stupidity. That is talent, aimed wrong, and for one long breath, standing at my own sink, I understood men who burn their own barns. What I did instead, I did because of the shovel. I am not being poetic. I walked out to the mudroom and took my father's irrigating shovel off its nail and put it in Della's hands the way I had on the good June morning, and I said, "Girl, you have moved water with me. Tell me, when 2 men are hollering at the head gate, each one swearing the other is a thief, how does the ditch rider find out the truth?" And Della, muddy to the knee in her memory somewhere, said slowly, "He does not listen to either one of them. He walks the bank and reads the water." And I said, "That is right." So do not believe me and do not believe him. Read the water. Then I put the copy of the recorded option on the kitchen table with its date, the 11th of March, and next to it the church bulletin from Willa's funeral with its date. And I went outside and left her alone with the arithmetic. She was still sitting there when I came back in, and she had her mother on the phone, and she was crying, and what she was saying into the phone was, month over month. Listen to me. Month over month. It was signed while Grandma was still alive. From that night, I was not working alone. Claire took a week of her vacation days and came out, and the three of us did quiet, boring, devastating things. We wrote down dates. We photographed the mail Dwight had been keeping in his truck, including 2 payment notices addressed to me. We got the propane office to confirm in writing when the bill had actually arrived and where. Carol Reese sent 1 letter to Legacy Shield asking 5 questions about their Colorado licensing, which produced a silence so complete it was practically a confession, and she made certified copies of the option, the stock certificates, and the survivorship registration and put a set in her office vault. No shouting, no accusations at Sunday dinner, just a file getting thicker like water behind a check dam. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the telephone rang in the little ditch company office in town, which is 1 room with a wood stove and the company's maps on the wall, where I still spend my Tuesday afternoons doing the books, because routine is the last thing grief takes from you, and I would not let it. A woman's voice, Denver polish, very courteous. She said she was calling for the office of the Crooked Willow Ditch Company, and she needed to verify some stock ownership in connection with a transaction her client was evaluating. She said her name was Ann Selden and that she was water counsel. Not Stillmark. The client behind Stillmark. The big user, running its own lawyers over the ground before it wrote the big check, the way serious money always does. I said, "This is the secretary of the company speaking, and how can I help you?" She asked her questions the way a title person does from a list. And then she reached the question her whole afternoon was pointed at. She said, "Our due diligence shows a block of 80 shares associated with a parcel under option through a Mr. Dwight, representing the Stockton family. Can the company confirm that ownership?" And I said, "No, ma'am. The company cannot confirm that because it is not true. Those 80 shares are held by Gilbert Stockton individually as surviving joint tenant, recorded in the stock book in my own hand. There is no other name on them. There is no authority over them but his." And after a pause, she said, "Thank you, and may I ask your own name, sir, for my notes?" And I said, "Certainly, Gilbert Stockton." I will keep the next few seconds of that phone call for myself, except to tell you that a Denver lawyer's silence, when it finally comes, is a very complete kind of silence. When she spoke again, her voice had changed registers entirely, and what she said was, "Mr. Stockton, I think you and I ought to speak at some length." We spoke at some length. I am not going to walk you through every step of the 2 weeks that followed, but I will tell you the shape of it. Ann Selden had a problem, and her problem was my opportunity, and grown people who each hold half of the truth can do business. Her client was about to anchor a 9-figure project on a package of options that all quietly assumed the water came along like a porch light. If that assumption was wrong, better to learn it now, in a conference room than in 2 years, in front of the water court in Greeley where every change of use has to be proven up in public, with history and measurements, against any neighbor, with a lawyer and a grudge. And when it came to history and measurements on the Crooked Willow, every useful record for half a century was in books I had kept. I did not have to threaten anybody. I have never threatened anybody in my life. I just let her look at the map as it actually was, instead of the map Dwight had sold them. And near the end of our last call before it all came to a head, she asked me the question everything had been circling. She said, "Mr. Stockton, hypothetically, if the structure respected the company and the neighbors and came to the table honestly, is there a price at which you would sell your shares?" I looked out the window of that 1-room office at the maps on the wall, my father's ditch drawn in ink older than me, and I said, "Ma'am, there is not. But there is something I want, and it is going to sound strange, and I want you to hear all of it before you answer. What I want is to be in the room when your people, and Stillmark, present this project to this valley. I understand there is a dinner planned. I hear it is going to be quite an evening. Dwight has been telling the whole county about it for 2 weeks, how he will be sitting at the head table, how the family opportunity is finally landing. I would like an invitation, a quiet one, in the back, and I would like you to do your job that night exactly the way you would do it anyway. Verify ownership, out loud, off your list, that is all. No theater from me, just the truth. Read into the room, in its right order." There was a pause, and then Ann Selden did something I did not expect. She laughed, one short note. the way tired professionals laugh when the file finally gets interesting, and she said, "Mr. Stockton, in my business we call that the quiet title. I will see you at the Grange." The dinner was the first Friday of October, at the Grange Hall out on the county road, the same hall where Will and I had danced at other people's weddings for 50 years. Stillmark rented it and did it up fine. White cloths on the long tables, a projector screen where the bingo board usually hangs, fried chicken from the cafe in town, and 140 chairs, which tells you they expected the whole valley, and the whole valley came. Farmers do not miss a free supper where somebody's going to talk about money, and neither do their wives, and neither, God help him, did Dwight. He was at the head table. He had bought a new jacket for it. He had Vonda on his arm in her good dress, and he worked that room like the mayor of somewhere, gripping shoulders, leaning down to booths of men who had known me 60 years and saying things that made them glance at the floor. I took a chair in the back row against the wall, next to Claire on one side and Della on the other, and when Dwight finally spotted me, his face did a thing I will remember the rest of my days. It flickered. Somewhere under the salesman, a 7-year-old boy looked out at me for half a second, scared, and then the jacket took over again and he gave me a big wave, the kind you give a harmless old fellow, and turned away. The Stillmark man, Kevin, the voice from the shed wall, made the presentation, and I will grant him this, it was a good one. Renderings on the screen. A campus, he called it. Jobs, tax base, a new wing for the school. And then the part everybody had come for. The numbers, parcel by parcel, and when our quarter came up on the screen, there was a little star on it. And Kevin said, "And we are especially pleased that the cornerstone parcel has come together thanks to the tireless work of a local partner." And he said Dwight's name and asked him to stand, and Dwight stood and buttoned his new jacket, and the room gave him a little round of applause while he pressed his hand to his heart like a man being decorated. And then Ann Selden stood up. She was at the end of the head table with a leather folder, and she said, before commitments are signed tonight, her client required the standard confirmations for the record. And she said it pleasantly, the way you would announce the pie flavors, and nobody in that room but 3 people knew that the evening had just changed owners. She confirmed the Herb's parcel, clean. She confirmed the cemetery quarters, clean. And then she said parcel 4, the Stockton quarter, held under option executed by Dwight as authorized representative of the Stockton family farm. And she paused and looked up, not at Dwight, and said, "Our title work was unable to confirm that representation, so I will ask it plainly for the record. Is the owner of record of this parcel present, and does he confirm this option?" You could hear the coffee maker in the kitchen. 140 people figured out all at once where to look, the way a field of sunflowers turns, and Dwight was still standing, which is the cruelest piece of the whole memory. He had never gotten to sit back down. I got up slow, because I am 76 and because there was no reason left to hurry, and I said, "My name is Gil Stockton. I own that quarter, the only name on the deed since my father died. I never gave any man authority to represent it, and I never saw that option until I found it recorded at the courthouse, signed the 11th of March, which those of you who were at the funeral can work out for yourselves, was 4 weeks before my wife passed." I heard the room do its arithmetic. It sounded like weather coming. "And," I said, "since the lady is making a record, she had better have the rest of it. The wet part is not included. The water under that quarter is 80 shares of the Crooked Willow Ditch Company, and those shares are not part of the farm, and they are not part of any estate, and they are not for sale. They are held by me alone, as surviving joint tenant with my wife Willa, recorded in the company's stockbook, and under the company's bylaws, no share moves to any outside buyer without passing in front of our own farmers first. That rule was written in 1946 by men who watched a speculator try to pick a widow's pocket. And it has waited 80 years for tonight, and I am pleased to report it still works. I did not raise my voice at any point. I want that on the record too." Ann Selden closed her leather folder and said to the room in that pleasant pie-flavor voice that in light of the confirmations her client would be pausing all commitments in the valley pending, and I remember the phrase, a restructured approach that engages directly with the ditch company and its shareholders. Which is lawyer 4, we will start over, and this time with the man in the back row. Kevin from Stillmark was looking at Dwight the way you look at a truck you just bought as it rolls backward into a pond. Because whatever Stillmark had already paid out for the sewn-up cornerstone parcel, and I later learned it was $2,500 of walking around money plus a great many promises, Dwight had sold him a bridge over a river he did not own. Dwight left before the pie. He did not look at me going. Vonda looked, though, and I will not describe her face because she was mostly a bystander to her husband's arithmetic, and bystanders deserve some privacy. I found him that night where I knew I would find him, because a man returns to the scene of his childhood when the jacket finally comes off. He was sitting on my porch steps in the dark, and the new jacket was folded on his knees like something dead, and he was crying, and this time it was the real kind, the ugly kind, the kind with no audience premium in it. I sat down next to him on the step. I did not say anything for a while. The yard light hummed. "Way off! A train!" He said, "Are you going to have me arrested?" And I said, "Carol Reese tells me the district attorney would return her phone call with some interest. A man signing as representative of a farm he has no claim to." And then I said, "But no." And he asked me why not, and here is what I told him, and I had not planned a word of it. I said, "Dwight, the morning Willa died, near the end, she was mostly not talking, but she opened her eyes once and said, 'Who is looking after Dwight? Not the farm, not Della, you. 60 years old and you are still her baby brother with the tied shoelaces. I cannot hand you to a courtroom without answering to her, and I expect to see her again, so I will not do it. But I am not going to fix this for you either, and that is new, and you had better feel how new it is. You will pay Stillmark back their money yourself. You will stand up at the annual meeting in December, in front of the shareholders you wrote that letter to, and you will withdraw it, in your own voice, with the withdrawing explained. And then you are going to go home to Pueblo and be 68 years old, because there is no big deal coming. There was never a big deal coming, and the only even money in this life is work." He asked in a small voice if I thought the neighbors would ever speak to him again, and I said, "The ditch always needs walking in April, and a man can earn back a name in this county the same way he lost it, which is out loud, in front of everybody." Then I went inside and left the porch to him, because some medicine has to be swallowed alone. He stood up at the December meeting, and he did it. I will give him that until I die. Voice shaking, Vonda in the second row with her chin up, 40 farmers looking at their boots the way we do when a man is bleeding honestly in public. The proxies had all come back unsigned anyway. Bert Cole's move that the letter be stricken from the company's memory, seconded before he finished the sentence. And then old Marvin Herp stood up in the back, 89 years old, and said, "Well, while we are voting, I move. We thank the secretary for keeping the book right for 50 years. And the whole room stood up, and I will not tell you what my face did, because the secretary's face is his own business. I retired from the books that night, on my own 2 feet and my own speed, handed the green ledger to the company president in front of everybody, and it weighed nothing and it weighed everything. Dwight went back to Pueblo 2 days after the Grange dinner. At Christmas, a letter came, real paper, real stamp. There was a money order in it, the first of what he swore would be many until Stillmark was made whole, and it was small, and it has been followed by others, small, every month like drip irrigation. The letter said one thing I will share. It said, "You are the only man who ever told me no and stayed at the table. I do not fully know what to do with that sentence yet. I keep it in the safe box, with the certificates, which may tell you something." And in April, on the first morning of water, 1 year almost to the day since we buried Willa, I stood on the bank of the East Lateral with Della, and the river came down the Crooked Willow the way it has come since 1911, first in time, first in right, and I handed that girl my father's shovel for keeps. I told her what he told me. You cannot shove a river. You move it an inch at a time at the right spot in the right order, and it will feed everything you love. She cut the first notch herself. Her hands knew where. The field took a breath. So that is my story, friends. If you are wondering what to take home from it, take this. The people who came from my family did not come with a gun or a crowbar. They came with a glossy folder and a kind voice and a calendar in the exact season when my judgment was buried in the same ground as my wife. What saved us was not that I was smart in June. It was that Willa and I were careful 20 years ago, on a boring Tuesday, with a good lawyer, when nobody was sick and nobody was circling. Paper signed early, in the light, by people who love each other, will hold your family up long after your own knees give out. So if you have not sat down with somebody qualified, an elder law attorney in your own state, about how your own names sit on your own things, let this be the nudge. Do not sign in the fog. Do not sign on their calendar, and do not ever assume the wet part is included. First in time, first in right. It is the law of the river out here. It turned out to be the law of love, too. Willa got there before all of them, and her claim on this family drinks first, forever. This is Gil Stockton, out where the wind owns everything but the water. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. Leave a light on for somebody.